Hello my fellow working class heroes, good day. I am Carlo and welcome to Carlo Excels. These are the objectives of this episode. Today we're gonna talk about the AND and the OR logical functions. We're gonna start first with their definitions, how to use them, and then the combination of the AND and the OR logical functions. Now before we start, this lesson assumes that you already know how to use the if function, nested if functions, and you already know what logical functions are. If you haven't watched the previous 3 episodes of the if series, please check below this video in the descriptions area to find the links to the if function video, the nested if function video, and how to use logical functions. So right now we're here at Microsoft Excel and we have here our fictional students, and then we have here their fictional grade 10 grades for their 8 subjects. So in this particular example, we have here 200 students, and say for example, we're going to check each and every one of these students. We're gonna check each and every one of their grades, and then we're going to determine 2 things. First, are they going to graduate? In other words, do any of them have any grade lower than 75? Because in the Philippines, of course, 75 is the threshold to decide whether a student is going to pass or fail. So if the student has a grade lower than 75, then the student will not be able to graduate. Or in this case, if they are grade 10 students, they're not going to be able to complete, and they're not going to be able to move forward to senior high school. One more thing, of course, that we have to determine at the end of the school year is we have to figure out if any of these students deserve any honors. Of course, each and every school has its own way of determining honors, but the most common way of doing it is to have a grade minimum. Now, when I say a grade minimum, what I mean is each and every subject that a student has at the end of the year must have a grade greater than or equal to blank. For some schools, it's 90, for some schools, it's 95, for some schools, it's 85, depends on your school. So let's say, in this particular example, we're going to have a grade threshold of 90. In other words, for this particular example, a student who has a grade, who has all grades greater than or equal to 90 will deserve honors at the end of the school year. So once again, for a student to graduate, all of his grades must be greater than or equal to 75. In other words, if even one grade is 74 or lower, then the student is not going to graduate. And for the student to be an honor student, all grades must be greater than or equal to 90. Of course, to do something like this, you can simply use conditional formattings. For example, if you're going to determine who is not going to graduate, I'm going to highlight all of these cells here, and I'm going to use conditional formatting to determine who has a grade less than 75. And then let's fill it with light red. And so we look at the data. If any of these students has a grade, has a row that has any red color, then these students are potentially not graduating. However, in this case, you're going to still have to manually optically check each and every row to find if there are rows that don't have those red colors. So for example, you're still going to have to check manually. This row does not have any red colors. These rows do not have any red colors. So in other words, a bit of manual checking is still involved. Or if you want to do this to determine honors, so let's highlight all of these again, and then let's use conditional formatting. Any grade greater than 89, we're going to fill with, let's say, green. And then you have the data that looks like this. Again, you still have to manually check that each row should have all green grades for you to determine that that student deserves honors. So manual checking is still involved. Of course, manual checking has its problems because if you manually check, especially when you have 200 students, that's going to take a lot of time. And manual checking, of course, comes with potential human errors. Of course, one very good way to determine whether students are going to graduate or determine if the students are getting honors is to use the if function. Using the if function, of course, will allow us to automatically check, do any of these students have grades lower than 75? Or do any of these students have all of their grades greater than or equal to 90? By using the if function, we can automate this, and by automating it, we can do it very quickly, and we can do it with no human error. Now, one problem we have so far is, this is the structure of the if function we've been using. So in other words, you only have one question one condition, and this one condition is used to determine either true outcome A or false outcome B. However, in this case, you don't have just one question. You don't have just one condition. You have multiple conditions. In other words, you have to ask Microsoft Excel to check 8 times whether each and every grade either deserves a failure or deserves an honor. So in other words, you have 8 different conditions for just 2 outcomes. So once again, this is a different case from nested if functions, because in nested if functions, you have multiple outcomes, more than 2 outcomes with more than 2 conditions. But in this case, you have more than 2 conditions, but you only have 2 outcomes. And this is where the AND and the OR functions come in. The AND and the OR functions allow you to check multiple logical arguments, in fact up to 255 logical arguments, for you to determine just 2 outcomes. So let's start first with the OR function. The OR logical function returns true if one of its arguments evaluate to true, returns false if all arguments evaluate to false. One common use for the OR function is to expand the usefulness of other functions that perform logical tests. By using the OR function as a logical test argument of the if function, you can test many different conditions instead of just one. So for the OR function, the function name is OR, and for the function arguments, you have your logical tests. Up to 255 logical tests are allowed. So far, this is the kind of if function we've been discussing. So in this kind of if function, the most basic kind, you just have one question. You just have one logical test. If this logical test is true, then you have outcome A. If this logical test is false, then you have outcome B. However, because of the OR function, we are able to perform a more complex logical tests. So you see in this diagram, you have multiple conditions. You have multiple logical tests. So Microsoft Excel is going to test each and every one of them. In the OR function, if you have 3, in this case, we have 3 examples, but this can be up to 255 different logical tests. If even one of them is true, then you go to outcome A. If all of them turn out to be false, then you have outcome B. So we're back in Microsoft Excel. We have here our sample worksheet. So in this sample worksheet, we are going to ask a user to input values in these 3 different cells. So in this example, we're going to write an if function that looks like this. We're going to ask Microsoft Excel to check all of these cells, these 3 cells. If any one of these cells, if at least one of these cells has a value equal to 5, if at least one of the input cells is equal to 5, then we're going to ask the results space over here to say the words condition met. But if none of those cells has a value equal to 5, in other words, if 5 does not appear in any of these cells, then we're going to have this cell over here display the message condition not met. So in other words, what we are doing is we're going to ask Microsoft Excel to evaluate 3 different logical arguments for just 2 outcomes. Alright, so how do we do that? Let's write the if function first. So if, and then open parenthesis. So now it's looking for a logical test. This is how we use the OR function, because of course OR function is a logical function, so it belongs to the logical test. So we call out the OR function like so, and then we open parenthesis. So once we open parenthesis, the OR function is now looking for logical tests, plural, different logical tests. And what the OR function is going to do again is it's going to check all of those logical tests, and if one of them turns out to be true, then the whole OR function turns out to be true. So let's ask the OR function to check the following. Is this cell equal to 5? All right, and then let's place a comma here for us to input the next logical test, and then we ask the OR function to evaluate, is this cell equal to 5? And then let's ask the OR function to check again, is this cell equal to 5? And then close parenthesis. So what we essentially ask Microsoft Excel once again to do is, using the OR function, we ask Microsoft Excel to check 3 different cells. Is A2 equal to 5? Is A5 equal to 5? Is A8 equal to 5? If any of those is true, then the whole OR function turns out to be true. The whole logical test turns out to be true. So now this is the logical test. Let's now go to the next argument. What do we do if this is true? So once again, if this is true, this is the on cell C4 over here. This is what we want Microsoft Excel to display if it's true, condition met. And if it is not true, then this is what we want Microsoft Excel to display, condition not met. And then close parenthesis for us to complete the if function and then press enter. So far, the result says condition not met, of course, because the cells are still blank, and of course, blank cells have a value equal to 0. None of these cells have a value of 5, and so therefore, it says condition not met. If we input any value here, because none of them are 5, the cells still says condition not met. However, if you put a 5 in any one of these cells, say for example, I'm gonna put a 5 here, then the result says condition met. Again, why? Because of the way we set up the OR function. Because of the way we set up the OR function, if any one of these cells, any one of them, or even all of them actually, say 5, then the result changes to a true result. And of course, a true result means condition met. So once again, the OR function allows you to check multiple logical arguments. If any one of those logical arguments is true, then the whole OR function is true. If all of them are false, then the whole OR function is false. Next, we have the AND function. The AND function returns true if all its arguments evaluate to true, returns false if one or more arguments evaluate to false. One common use for the AND function is to expand the usefulness of other functions that perform logical tests. By using the AND function as the logical test argument of the if function, you can test many different conditions instead of just one. So for the AND function, the function name is AND, and for your function arguments, you have different logical tests, up to 255. So this is what the if function is for. In the if function, instead of testing just one logical argument and then you have two outcomes out of that one logical argument, the AND function allows you to test multiple logical arguments. In this example, you only have 3. But again, you can have up to 255 logical arguments. Now, Microsoft Excel checks each and every one of them. If all of them are true, then the whole AND function turns out to be true, and then you have one outcome. If any one of them turn out to be false, then all of them turn out to be false, and then you have another outcome. So we're back here in Microsoft Excel, and once again, we're going to have 3 input cell spaces here, and then we're going to display a result based on what we put here in our input cells. So in this example, we're going to create an if function. In this particular if function, this is what we're gonna do. We're going to ask the if function to evaluate these 3 cells. If all of them are equal to 5, then we're going to ask this cell to display the message condition met. If any one of those cells is not 5, then we're going to ask Microsoft Excel to display on this cell the words condition not met. So once again, in this particular example, you have a case wherein you have 3 different logical arguments and then you only have 2 outcomes, something that the AND function can do. So let's create the if function. So calling out the function name if and then open parenthesis. Now it's looking for a logical test. So for the logical test, we call out the AND function because that's where it belongs. So AND and then open parenthesis. Now the AND function is looking for multiple logical tests. And again, our logical tests are the following. We want to check if cell A2 is equal to 5. And then we want to check if cell A5 is equal to 5. And then we want to check if cell A8 is equal to 5. Then of course, we have all of those logical arguments there, close parenthesis, and then we proceed to the value if true, the next argument in the if function. So once again, what we are essentially asking Microsoft Excel to do is, we're going to check these 3 different cells with these 3 different arguments here. Is this equal to 5? Is this equal to 5? Is this equal to 5? If all of them are equal to 5, then the whole AND function turns out to be true. If even one of them is not equal to 5, then the whole AND function turns out to be false. So let's input our true argument. So once again, if this is true, then the cell should say condition met. So let's use this as a cell reference. And then if this statement is false, then this should display this statement here, condition not met. So let's close the if function and then press enter. So of course, right now the result says condition not met because of course these cells are still blank and blank cells have a value of 0. Now let's try inputting values here. Let's put in random numbers there, over here, and over here. So because none of these cells say 5, of course, condition is still not met. If you have one cell saying 5, of course, it still says condition not met because we want all of them. We need all of them to be 5 for this to be true. So if you have two cells saying 5, condition is still not met. But watch what happens if I enter 5 here. If I enter 5 here, the end function kicks in and it becomes condition met. So once again, the end function is a logical function that allows you to evaluate multiple logical arguments. If any one of those logical arguments is false, then the whole end function turns out to be false. All of the logical arguments need to be true for the end function to turn out true. So once again, let's compare. OR function, if one is true, all are true. End function, if one is false, all are false. But you should know, of course, that the AND and the OR functions actually play well with each other. They actually play well with all other logical functions. The AND, the OR, and of course the NOT functions can all function together. Say for example, the example you can see on the screen. So you can see here, conditions over here. So you have your 3 input cells and we're going to evaluate, you're going to have a result here based on these 3 input cells. Let's say for example, these are our conditions. All of the input cells need to be equal to 5, or all of the input cells should be equal to 10. So you will see here now a combination of the end function. So you have 2 end functions here. This, all of the input cells are equal to 5. This is supposed to be an end function. All of the input cells are equal to 10. This is another end function. And then we have an OR in between them. Either this is true or this is true. Then we have condition met. If none of these conditions are met, then of course we have condition not met. Let's first try to build this particular condition here. This is an end function. So let's try to build that first. So let's call out the function end, all right? And then all input cells need to be equal to 5. So this needs to be equal to 5. This needs to be equal to 5. And then this needs to be equal to 5. Press enter, and of course it's still false. The value is still false because none of these are equal to 5. If we put 5 in all 3 of them, then of course this now turns out to be true. So this is the end, this cell over here is the end function for this condition. Next, let's write an end function for this particular condition here. All of the input cells need to be equal to 10. So that's another end function. So let's write that. End. This needs to be equal to 10. This needs to be equal to 10. And then this needs to be equal to 10. So right now it's false. But if you have here 10, 10, 10, then you have this end function turning out to be true. So how now do we write this particular if function here? Well, what we do is we nest the 2 end functions within the 1 OR function that we need. This is what we're gonna do. Now let's write the if function. So if, and then we call out the OR function. So let's write there OR, and then open parenthesis. Now the OR function is looking for our 2 logical arguments. The 2 logical arguments are these. The logical argument that these input cells must all be equal to 5, and the logical argument that all of these cells must be equal to 10. So if either these are all equal to 5 or if these are all equal to 10, then the whole OR function turns out to be true. If not, then everything is false. So let's do the first end function. Once again, end function and then open parenthesis. This needs to be 5, and then this needs to be 5, and then this needs to be 5, and then close the end function. After that, the OR function is still looking for its second logical argument, so we press the comma. And the next logical argument that we need to do is that all of these need to be equal to 10. So another end function here, and then this should be 10, and this should be 10, and this should be 10. And then close the end function, and finally close the OR function. So now that we have all of that set up, that is now our logical test. So we press comma to enter our value if true. So if all of that is true, once again, we display this cell over here, condition met. And then if all of that is not true, or yeah, if this turns out to be false, then this should be the result, condition not met. Close parenthesis to close the if function, and then press enter. So let's try out what we did. So let's put random numbers here. Of course, none of those are 5s or 10s, and none of this is turning out to be true. If we put 1 5 here, still not turning out to be true, condition is still not met. But if we put all 5 here on these input cells, suddenly one of the conditions, if you can see here below, one of the conditions is now turning out to be true. And because this is enclosed within an OR function, this statement here is now met. This condition is now met because all of the input cells are now equal to 5. Now, if you have a combination of 10s or 5s, condition is not met because all of them need to be 5 or all of them need to be 10. Now, let's try this. If all of them are now 10, condition is met. So that is because, as you can see here, the second statement is now true. So either all of them are 5 or all of them are 10 for condition to be met. So that is how you combine end functions and nest them within one OR function. Now we have here a different situation. So you have here another worksheet. So you once again have your 3 input cells. We have our result here, and these are the conditions. If at least one of the input cells is equal to 5, if at least one of these cells is equal to 5, and if at least one of the input cells is equal to 10, then you have the message condition met. If none of that is true, if the condition is not met, then of course it says their condition not met. So now you will notice that this is different from what we did a while ago. A while ago, we had 2 end functions enclosed within an OR function, and I hope you can guess now that this particular function here, this particular argument here, this is an OR function. This is another OR function, and both of them have to be enclosed within one end function. So let's try that out. Let's try the first OR function. Let's put it over here. So OR, and then at least one of the cells need to be equal to 5. So either this is equal to 5, or this is equal to 5, or this is equal to 5. And then that is your OR function, and then press enter. Of course, right now it says false, but if one of those cells say 5, then it's now turning out to be true. Next, let's do this second OR function here. So OR, either this is equal to 10, or this is equal to 10, or this is equal to 10. So that is your OR function. Press enter. Right now it says false, of course, but if one of them is equal to 10, then it's now turning out to be true. So now let's write our if function with this combination of end and OR functions. So I hope you're seeing now that what you're supposed to do is you have to take those 2 OR functions and you have to nest them within one end function. So let's try doing that now. Calling out the if function like so, and then we call out the end function like so. Now the end function is looking for arguments. Again, our first argument is this. One of these cells needs to be 5. So either this is 5, or this is 5, or this is 5. And either one of these cells needs to be 10. So or either this is 10, or this is 10, or this is 10. Close that OR function, and then we now close our whole end function. And then that is our logical test. So it's now looking for the value if true. If this whole condition is met, then we want this cell here to display this message. And if that condition is not met, then we want this cell to display this message. Close the if function and then press enter. So right now, of course, it says condition not met. So let's input values over here. Condition is still not met because one of those cells is not equal to 5 and one of those cells is not equal to 10. So if we put a value here, let's say on cell 1, let's put a 5 here. You will notice below that the first condition is now turning out to be true. But of course, because of how the end function works, both conditions need to be true. So if you have all of them having 5, then only the first condition is turning out to be true. If all of them have a 10, in this case, only the second condition is turning out to be true because you have at least one 10 here but no 5s. So for the condition to be met in this case, you have to have at least one 5 and one 10 here. So you have 10 here. Let's put a 20 here. So if this says 10 and this says 5, for example, then the condition is met. Why is the condition met? Because both the OR functions are now turning out to be true, and both of them being true is a condition of the AND function governing both of them. So because you have at least one input cell equal to 5 and one input cell turning out to be 10, then condition is met. So that is how you have two OR functions nested within one AND function. So now that we know how to use the AND and the OR functions, we can finally solve this very common problem that teachers have. How do we automatically determine if students are going to graduate? And how do we automatically determine if any of the students deserve any honors? Let's start first with the condition of are they graduating or not? And then let's do this. Let's have Microsoft Excel check each and every cell here. If any one of those cells is less than 75, any one of them is less than 75, then we want this space here, the result here, to say no. But if all of them are 75 or greater, then we just leave it blank. That is a job for the OR function. So let's call out the if function for this, equals if, and then let's call out the OR function like so. So OR. Now once again, what we want is, we want to check each and every one of these if they're less than 75. If one of them is less than 75, then we want to display the message no. So, or is this less than 75? 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 Like so. And then that's all of our conditions, that's all of our logical arguments, and then we close the OR function. So, time to write what's going to happen if it's true. So once again, if at least one of these turn out to be true, meaning if one of these is less than 75, then we want the space here to say the words no, meaning they're not going to graduate, at least not yet. And then, what is it going to say if it's false? We're just going to use here a text blank. And once again, a text blank is just double quotation marks. That just leaves the cell blank. So let's close the if function like so, and then press enter. So let's center that for it to look good. Now, of course, in this case, for this particular student, you have two grades less than 75. That is why it's saying, no, this student is not going to graduate. Now, because we used all relative references here, let's Control-C that, let's copy that, and then paste it all the way down here. And you now have a bird's eye view, without having to check the numbers, you now have a bird's eye view of the people who are not going to graduate because they have a grade less than 75. And we were able to do that very, very quickly, very, very easily with the OR function. Next, let's check for honors. Now, once again, for the student to be an honor student, in this particular example, once again, all schools have their own different honor thresholds. But for this example, let's say that a student needs to have a grade of 90 or greater. All of them need to be 90 or greater for the student to become an honor student. So once again, because all of them need to have a grade greater than or equal to 90, that is a job for the AND function. So let's try that now, calling out the if function like so, and then of course we have the logical test. In this logical test, we need the AND function for this. So once again, we call out all of these grades and then try to check if they're greater than or equal to 90. So this needs to be greater than or equal to 90, and this needs to be greater than or equal to 90, and this needs to be greater than or equal to 90, and this needs to be greater than or equal to 90, and this needs to be greater than or equal to 90, and this grade over here needs to be greater than or equal to 90. So with this grade greater than or equal to 90, and so with this grade greater than or equal to 90. So those are all our logical arguments. Let's close parenthesis, and then let's proceed to the value if true. Now let's say, for example, we want the space to say yes, the student is an honor student if all of those conditions are met. So let's have here the text saying yes as our value if true, and then just a text blank if the student is not an honor student. closing the if parenthesis, and then press enter. So right now, you may be startled, oh, it's blank, nothing happened. Of course, because this student is not an honor student. So therefore, we can take this function here that you can see on cell K2, we can copy that, paste it all the way down here, and then when we paste that, you will now notice, of course, that Microsoft Excel using the end function has now checked each and every student's grade to determine if they deserve honors. So we have here our list of honors, and you don't even have to check the grades because the end function checks the grades by itself. So without having to check the numbers, you're able to determine the honors quickly and easily using the if and the end function. Now, I have to admit that at first, for those who are not very used to using the end and the or functions, it can get very confusing at first. You might make a lot of mistakes in setting your logical arguments when using the end and the or functions. All I can say regarding that is, all you need is just a little bit of practice. Open your Microsoft Excel worksheet, try out a few conditions, try the if and the end functions, the end and the or functions rather. You can replay this video again and again. If in case there are certain parts that are not clear to you, try to emulate the examples that we did in this video. And of course, once you build your end and your or functions, you check, you test, you debug, and I'm sure after a while, you'll be able to get the hang of the end and the or functions. So that's it for our lesson on the end and the or functions. I hope I earned your subscription today. Once again, I am Carlo, and this is Carlo Excels. Thank you very much for watching.